Welcome, everyone, to the third roundtable discussion of the International Borlaug Dialogue 2020. Safe, affordable, nutritious food year-round. Global aspirations to local application for nutrition. Wasn't that a tremendous opening panel on media? Provocative comments and questions, and our own Borlaug Dialogue Director, Meghna Ravishankar. Great job. Later today, we're going to have two interactive workshops. These are brand new to the Borlaug Dialogue, interactive workshops where they're really for learning, a learning journey. So sign up in advance because you have to register in advance. So now it is my pleasure to introduce to you our speakers for today. You can see all of their biographies right there on your screen on the Whova platform. First, I want to introduce Shawn Baker, Chief Nutritionist for USAID. Shawn, welcome.
Thank you, Barbara. And thank you for those introductions. And I think thanks especially to the World Food Prize Foundation for dedicating one of these roundtables of the Borlaug Dialogues to the contributions or how it can make sure that the food system contributes to nutrition. And I always think...
Shawn, we're going to go ahead and introduce everybody.
Okay.
Come to you for some opening remarks.
Thank you.
No problem. Dr. Jessica Fonzo is Distinguished Professor, Johns Hopkins University. Welcome, Jess.
Great to be here. Thank you, Barbara.
Dr. Lawrence Haddad is the Executive Director of the Global Alliance for Improved Nutrition, and he's also our 2018 World Food Prize Laureate. Lawrence.
Great to be here, Barbara. Thank you.
Professor Mario Herrero, Chief Research Scientist at Cicero. Ciro, dialing in from Australia. Thank you, Mario.
Well, thanks for the introduction, Barbara. It's a pleasure to be here.
Dr. Renata Mika, Independent Expert Group Chair for the Global Nutrition Report, but she's also a professor at Tufts University.
Thank you so much for the introduction. I look forward to the fascinating discussion.
Ndidi Buneli. She is co-founder of Sahel Consulting and also chair of Nourishing Africa. Welcome, Ndidi.
Great to be here.
Dr. Prabhu Pingali is professor, Cornell University. Welcome, Prabhu.
Thanks, Barbara. Delighted to be here.
Polly Ruland. She serves as Chief Executive Officer for United Soybean Board here in the U.S. Welcome, Polly.
Thank you so much. Honored to be here today.
Dr. Pedro Sanchez. He is our 2002 World Food Prize Laureate and research professor at University of Florida.
Thank you, Barbara. You may be wondering what a tropical soil scientist is doing in this meeting.
I'm sure you'll answer that. And we are proud to welcome our World Food Prize Borlaug Field Award recipient, Dr. Salma Sultana, announced just yesterday.
Thank you, President. I'm really honored to be here with this distinguished panelist. Thank you.
Thank you, Salma. Dr. Madhura Swaminathan is chairperson of the MS Swaminathan Research Foundation, but also professor at the Indian Statistical Institute. Welcome, Madhura.
Thank you, and I really look forward to this discussion today.
Great. Well, what a distinguished panel. Shawn, we're going to turn it over to you for some framing remarks for our discussion.
Thanks, Barbara. And sorry for jumping the gun on going into some of my framing remarks, but it's a real pleasure and honor to be with this distinguished group here today. And thanks again to the World Food Prize Foundation for organizing this roundtable on how we can make sure that the food systems of the future do contribute to good nutrition. And that's where I think it's always useful to start out a discussion on nutrition to remind ourselves why nutrition is so essential for everything we care about. 45% of all under 5 deaths are attributable to malnutrition. That means, as public health specialists, we're trained to always nuance it, but that means that those children whatever they died of, if they had been well nourished, they would be
Seeing how
alive
the
today.
effects of COVID are
And
reversing
as
decades of
importantly,
progress on
those children who survive undernutrition, we know we've compromised their futures because we've compromised their cognitive and physical development. I think it's also important, I think, for this gathering particularly to understand that the very communities who bear the brunt of the burden of providing food for the world, particularly smallholder farmer communities, are really also often the ones who are the most at risk of malnutrition. So not only these very people who are doing all the work to feed the world are suffering an undue share of the burden of malnutrition, its consequences on their future. Unfortunately, despite this incredible burden that malnutrition poses on the world in terms of excess mortality and compromised futures, it remains grossly under-resourced. If you look at the nutrition-specific interventions, those interventions mainly delivered through the health system, we still today have less than 1% of official development assistance going to those interventions. And then the resources provided to those interventions by governments of high burden countries is similarly very low. And that calls out why it's so important that we have a food system that delivers safe, affordable, nutritious food year round. I often characterize what we do in public health nutrition is digging ourselves out of a hole created by a food system that's not delivering what we need in terms of safe, affordable, nutritious food. And also for the very communities that we serve the most, I think when we talk about food systems, we still have this myth that somehow smallholder farmers are generating all their own food and consuming their own food, where we know that, in fact, almost everybody is a net purchaser of food. I think there's an example from Nigeria, and it's always daunting to quote Nigeria statistics when you have somebody like Ndidi on the panel. But if you look at the poorest quintiles in Nigeria, 82% of Nigerian households in the poorest quintiles are going to be spending more than 3/4 of their household income on purchasing food. So affordability is a fundamental constraint, affordability and access. And this is especially true for those parts of the population with the highest nutrient needs, infants and young children from 6 to 23 months and pregnant and lactating women. We know that in the first 6 months, breast milk is providing all the nutrient needs for infants and young kids. But as soon as kids start reaching 6 months in that critical 6 to 23 month age group, their nutrient needs are especially high. They need, in addition to breast milk, and they need nutrient dense foods because their capacities to absorb are so low. But we are fundamentally failing to meet their needs. A review of diets of infants and young kids in low and middle income countries shows that only 18% are receiving a minimum acceptable diet. So that's a gross failing of the food system to deliver nutrients for those children. And if you look at the situation for pregnant and lactating women, the statistics are equally grim, but we have much less available data globally. And to underscore what I'd said about the affordability being such a constraint, if you just take, again, a Nigerian example in a case of a very nutrient-dense food, an egg, we often in public health nutrition are promoting egg consumption for infants and young children and pregnant and lactating women. But in Nigeria, if you are in the 4th socioeconomic quintile, so not even the poorest of the poor, one egg is going to cost you the equivalent of 44% of your daily income. So that just is a concrete example of the true constraints of households to meet the nutrient needs. I do think that we've seen, and then if you go further of even what I would say are the most basic needs we should be meeting through the food system, the needs of essential vitamins and minerals, we still have at least 2 billion people in the world who suffer one or more micronutrient deficiencies. So I would say at a bare minimum, the food system needs to be delivering micronutrient security, making sure that we're meeting the micronutrient needs of populations. This situation is getting further complex as food systems are evolving at such a rapid clip, and we're already seeing situations where unhealthy processed foods are displacing more nutrient-dense foods in the diets of infants and young children. And so we really need to be engaged, working hand in hand with policymakers across the world of how do we change this dynamic so that the food system is delivering better on the nutrition side. We're all struck by the challenges of COVID and how much the current pandemic has disrupted every system we rely on to deliver good nutrition. I also, though, because I'm basically an optimist, think that COVID offers an opportunity because it's pressure tested every part of the food system. And we now, I think, know much better of those parts of the food system that they are most essential to reinforce as we go into dealing with COVID and rebuilding as we overcome the challenges of COVID. And those parts of the food system that need to be strengthened the most to make sure they're delivering safe, affordable, nutritious food. And that's why I also particularly appreciate the timing of this roundtable of the Borlaug dialogues, because as we go into 2021, I think it's really a make or break year for nutrition. The past decade has seen some progress in positioning of nutrition, but really 2021, we can go into it with the UN Food System Summit, with the Nutrition for Growth Summit in December of 2021, of really clear guidance and commitments to how do we step up to really deliver on the nutrition agenda. So thank you, Barbara, for giving me the opportunity for those framing remarks, and back over to you for the rest of the panel.
Well, thank you so much for setting out those challenges, the paradoxes that we face in all of these challenges. Let's hear some quick opening remarks. This group wanted to do a lightning round of opening remarks, just 1 minute each. And Renata, I think you're going to kick us off.
Thank you. Echoing Shawn's remarks, COVID-19 is both a threat and an opportunity for nutrition. And as he mentioned, we're already seeing how the effects of COVID are reversing decades of progress on tackling malnutrition. And at the same time, this pandemic has forced all of us to come together, pay attention to our food, and rethink our food systems. Poor diets and resulting malnutrition are among the greatest societal challenges of our time. We now live in a world where 1 in every 9 people is hungry and 1 in every 3 people is overweight or obese. Though these global statistics do hide significant inequalities between countries, within countries, and populations, no country is spared. And now we see that more and more countries experiencing the double burden of malnutrition, where undernutrition coexists with overweight, obesity, and other diet-related diseases. We also know that poor diets are not simply a matter of personal choices. Most people nowadays cannot access or afford healthy food. Our food systems are failing us, especially the poorest and most vulnerable, and there's an urgent need for them to change. Fixing our broken food system offers us a unique opportunity to tackle many other interconnected challenges, from reducing inequality, curbing climate change, strengthening our economies and livelihoods, to building resilient populations and preserving our future. We have the tools and the know-how. We just need to come together, be well-resourced, and summon the political will across governments, civil society, and businesses to act. Nourishing everyone in the COVID-19 era and beyond, and especially in the years to come, should be our top priority.
Thank you, Renata. Jess, you're next. Maybe we can bring us all into grid view so that we can see each other. We're going to do 1 minute lightning remarks.
Great. So from my perspective as a researcher working in an academic institution, I think it's in a way a great time because food systems are now in the global spotlight. along with climate change and the COVID pandemic. But evidence and data on these topics has been called into question by many policymakers. I won't name any. But now is the time to keep that light focused and bring evidence in a coherent way to governments so they can make rational decisions about how to tackle their own contextualized food system challenges. So in summary, I think research, data, and evidence can and does bring about wholesale changes in attitudes, political thought, and action. And to me, the World Food Prize really provides a platform to highlight some of the best evidence and data and those that are generating it.
Great, thank you. That's exactly what we're trying to do. Lawrence?
Thanks, Barbara. As you know, Jess and Shawn and Renata have said, we are really in a dynamic space right now. The unthinkable is becoming thinkable, the impossible is becoming possible, and the undoable is becoming doable. So we're really in a not business as usual kind of space. But those of us who care about food and nutrition, we must really participate fully in this fast-paced, dynamic context. And to me, that means we have to have the imagination to be able to inject our issues and the things we care about into new spaces. We have to have the humility to collaborate, and we need to be inspired by the scientists that are collaborating to deal with COVID. And if it's not business as usual, that should apply to us as well. And we have to be really prepared to get out of our comfort zone and work with people who we don't normally work with to advance and accelerate nutrition improvement. Thank you, Barbara.
Ndidi, you're calling in from Nigeria, I believe.
Yes, and I'm so glad that Shawn started us off in how important Nigeria is to this discussion. But as an SME and as an entrepreneur, I believe the private sector is pivotal to addressing the malnutrition challenges in our countries and in our globe. Not only because they produce majority of the food we consume, but because they are such influencers in terms of how people view food, leveraging advertising, and how we shape the narrative and the discussion around what is healthy and unhealthy food. And they have to play a critical role, not only through innovation, but also through cross-sector collaborations to reduce the cost of food and ensure accessibility and affordability. And so I am very excited about this opportunity to build back better. What COVID-19 has done is bring down the walls between companies and between us and other actors like the government to actually sit together for the first time in my experience to actually say, how can we build back better? How can we work collaboratively to put consumers at the heart of this nutrition dialogue? And so I'm really excited about collaborating with many more of you to see how we can take this forward.
Mario.
I think, from my perspective, I think that it has to happen now, or it will be never. We will miss a significant opportunity to really achieve many of the multiple goals that the world's interested in achieving. For me, the unique opportunity is in having actions that will meet the nutritional problem together with health and the environment. The interconnectedness of diets is so essential for what we want to do. For example, trying to influence the targets for the Paris Agreement becomes essential. Also, reaching the biodiversity targets. We know that all these systems are very well linked, and we need to try to achieve as much as possible from all angles, both from the nutrition side, from the production side, from the waste reduction. But it is essential that we do it now because we don't have the time anymore.
Thank you. Thanks to all of you. Dr. Sultana from Bangladesh.
Yeah, thank you. I strongly agree with Shawn. He said accessibility and availability, and we all should ensure that. And we need multi-sectoral collaboration. We need to establish viable, inclusive, and coherent governance system for food and nutrition, nutritional security, actually.
Thank you. Prabhu.
Thank you, Barbara. We keep talking about agriculture for nutrition and nutrition-sensitive food systems. But I find that agriculture policy is completely disconnected from nutrition outcomes. Agriculture policy has historically been focused on staple grains and staple grain productivity, and there's been a significant crowding out of nutrient-rich food, millets, pulses, tropical roots and tubers, small farm livestock systems, etc. And that crowding out continues to happen today because agriculture policy hasn't made the transformation from looking at staple grain productivity improvement, supply improvement, to looking at a much more balanced food system. And I think that's where the paradigm shift needs to happen. And we need to see a significant convergence of agriculture policy with overall food policy and with nutrition policy in order to make agriculture work for better nutrition outcomes. Thank you.
Thank you for laying forth that challenge. Polly?
Good morning. You know, I represent soybean farmers and farmers in general, and the critical role that farmers play in progress toward food systems that provide nutrition to the world in a sustainable way. And yet, I find that farmers are often absent from policy and solution discussions. So here at the United Soybean Board, we focus not on policy, but on real life, innovative, collaborative solutions to food chain challenges in production and in food distribution. That's what we invest our farmers' money in. So we want to be in the discussion and part of any solution to nourish a global population with that high quality, sustainable protein source that we're so good at. We have an enormous impact, farmers globally have an enormous impact on economic, environmental, and social issues, and we take our role very seriously in supporting global communities and local, regional, and global solutions to nutrition challenges. We feel very strongly that passing the responsibility of feeding the world while leaving the land in a better condition than we found it is a global responsibility of farmers. So that's the perspective I'll be representing today.
Thank you, Polly. Madhura, you're calling in from India.
Yes. I speak from an economist perspective, and we always have to make choices. And I think while the problems are global, the priorities for food and nutrition security depend on where you're coming from. And speaking from India today, and as one who is interested and works on issues of rural India, 1 in 3 adult women are malnourished today, and 1 in 7 are overnourished. So I think that the global number that Renata gave looks very different when you disaggregate it and when you look at countries of the South, particularly South Asia, Sub-Saharan Africa, and so on. Children below the age of 2, whom Shawn talked about, most critical age, less than 10% of such children in India are adequately fed. So my first point is that I think we need to take a disaggregated view when we look at priorities for action. The second point, I think, which the others have brought out, this is a make or break time. And one of the things is that our static or stock measures of undernutrition or calorie intake have collapsed. The shock of the pandemic and lockdown has brought hundreds of millions more into a food insecure situation. And I think today, I hope during this session, we have to learn from the experience of countries or regions that have managed to stave off hunger and malnutrition during this crisis and take those lessons forward elsewhere. Thank you.
Thank you. Pedro, your opening remark.
Thank you. As an agronomist, I just wondered, okay, I get it. I get the need for better nutrition for systems, everything that you have been talking about. But the answer is in the farm or in the fishers. The answers are with the farmers. So I kind of wondered, suppose we take one of this nutritionally balanced diet, and I took the Eat Lancet diet, which is quite famous or infamous, but anyway, it's quite it's quite full of detail. Suppose we say that by 2050, with 10 billion people in the planet, what's going to happen? How can we put farming in this broader sense to grow that much food, that much nutrient-rich food, along with some nutrient-poor foods that we need? So at this point, basically, the world production of food is 65% of nutrient-poor foods and 35% of nutrient-rich foods. According to the calculations that I've been able to make, and I published it in the journal Food Policy earlier this year, we need to flip that. Instead of 2-to-1 in favor of nutrient poor foods, we have to reverse it and have 3/4 of the production being nutrient-rich foods and only 24% nutrient-poor foods. So stay tuned, and I'll tell you the data.
Thank you so much. We want to hear more about that. But let's take the whole conversation a little bit deeper. So you've mapped out an incredible array of challenges that we have to face. I want to hear from several of you now. What really are, in your mind, from your standpoint and where you work, what are the most critical elements to tackle right now? Lawrence, let's start with you.
Thank you, Barbara. The exam question you gave me, Barbara, is what has to be done to achieve safe, affordable, nutritious food year-round? And I have 3 minutes minus 15 seconds to answer that. So the first thing I think is really important is to find the spark. Find the spark. Not enough political leaders, not enough business leaders understand that this is a massive problem, that our food systems are wrecking our health systems, are wrecking our social protection systems, and are wrecking our environment. Not enough people understand that. So where I see a lot of action in Norway, in India, in the UK, I can usually trace that to a small group of highly influential, highly active people who will not take no for an answer. So that's the first thing, find the spark. Then push on the levers. What are the levers? There's no one part of the food system that can change to transform this. It needs pushing from 3 different parts. So the first lever is consumer demand. Consumers are incredibly important for creating the incentives for everyone in the food system to do things differently, to do the kinds of things that Pedro was just talking about. And yet when we look at consumer demand campaigns, they're hopelessly generic and hopelessly unimaginative and boring. They're worthy but dull. So we need to create really imaginative demand creation programs that mobilize the agency of consumers. Second thing we need to do on the levers, the second lever, is policy. Prabhu has already alluded to this. Agricultural R&D priorities are set in the 20th century. They are not fit for purpose for the 21st century. They are geared too much to staple foods and not enough to nutrient-rich foods. But equally, public procurement policies, the state is the major purchaser of food in many countries. Public procurement is very often geared towards the cheap calories that are empty and not the nutrient-rich foods. So policy can play a huge role. Third lever, investors. There's a massive impact investing business out there. It's hundreds of billions of dollars. Hardly any of it goes to agriculture and food, and hardly any of the agriculture and food stuff goes to nutritious food for domestic consumption. How do we make it easier for activist investors, and how do we grow the number of activist investors to invest in nutritious foods? And I think there are ways of doing that involve new facilities that can be set up. If we do that, if we find the spark, if we pull on these 3 levers, we will create changes in the rules of the game. We need to find rules of the game changes in food systems. If we do that, we'll give businesses, and let's face it, they're the engines of food systems, we'll give them the incentives to innovate and develop business models that can generate profit and lower the cost of nutritious foods for the most vulnerable. Thank you, Barbara.
Thank you, Lawrence. The spark, the levers, and business as the engines. How do we really bring all of that forward at this time? So Polly, let's go to you to talk about those most needed actions. What has to be done to achieve safe, affordable, nutritious food year-round?
I think it's very interesting, the mention of innovative or ingenious demand building programs, because that's part of what we do at United Soybean Board. And I think what's important to remember is that farmers will respond to market signals. In other words, if we complain that farmers are raising the wrong kind of food, or they should be raising something that they're not raising, they're going to respond to those demand market signals that they are given, and they're going to have to make a living at it. So we have to remember that global food production, feeding the world, is never a one-size-fits-all solution. That across the globe, we have different regulatory, environmental, and social concerns. So workable solutions will always bring farmers to the table, and will always bring consumers to the table to talk about how those two can meet to achieve nutritious, affordable, and safe food supply. Those solutions have to be crafted by both local and regional experts and people, and global strategies that consider the capacity of the land, of the people, of the culture. And the thing is, farmers know these things because they have to learn the capacity and working of the land, of the culture, of the people that are around them in order to produce food. So I would submit that farmers can be the spark. Farmers can help drive the demand if given a chance. But nutritious food security and food supply solutions depend on different types of information and knowledge informing them. And also the long-term economic sustainability of farmers anywhere depends on their ability to meet needs with products that are actually bought in the marketplace. I think another really important aspect of this is we have to remember that the adoption of technology has been in farming, has been and will be even more important as the climate continues to change. For example, about 70 to 80% of large US farms, that is farms greater than 2,900 acres, use GPS mapping, about 80% use guidance systems, 30 to 40% use variable application rate technology, all to improve sustainability as well as production per acre. So when we make available and adopt technologies globally, and those include gene modification technologies and emerging gene editing technologies, we can solve and provide affordable, accessible food throughout the world. So especially when we think about in the face of drought, flooding, and other natural disasters across the globe. So that's critical to the future of farming. Technology is, demand is, and the ability for farmers to sustain economically globally is critical to the nutrition challenge as well as the sustainability challenge. And I think those areas are very important as we consider safe, affordable, and accessible food.
Thank you, Polly. Ndidi, from your perspective, what's most needed?
Thank you so much. Yeah, so I'm going to be speaking from the perspective of what large companies can do and what small companies can do. As Shawn started off with, 57% of household income in Nigeria is spent on food, and 20% of that food is eaten outside the home. So people depend on food companies, processed food companies, but companies across the board from farm to fork. They have a very important role to play through three lenses. At the very least, they have to do no harm, but even do good by setting standards in the industry, by meeting mandatory fortification requirements, especially around micronutrient fortification in countries that have those requirements. They even have to ensure that they're producing nutritious and healthy food and hold each other accountable through peer review mechanisms. Number two, they have to invest in innovation to ensure the availability and affordability of food. In my context, 50 cents is the price point, and working with that price point to ensure affordability and availability is critical. Number three, they have to build inclusive businesses, which means they have to source locally from smallholder farmers, ensure transparent ecosystems, and ensure that level of engagement with their farmers. Through Sahel Consulting, we're working in the dairy industry through the Advancing Local Dairy Development Program in Nigeria, and proving that it is possible to source locally while also improving the lives of the smallholder farmers you're sourcing from by tracking their own nutrition indices. Now, SMEs are also critical, and through nourishingafrica.com, we're working with over 600 agribusinesses in Africa, and we're empowering these entrepreneurs to understand their role as nutrition champions and to invest in providing nutritious food. And I think initiatives such as Nourishing Africa, Scaling Up Nutrition, accelerators, incubators, and platforms like that can raise a generation of very committed nutrition champions, because the private sector has to play this pivotal role in demonstrating what is possible, but also in providing the nutritious food that meets the needs of people from farm to fork. And I think we're starting to see pockets of hope and change, and we need to create this spark that Lawrence talked about and ensure that more champions enter this ecosystem. So I'm extremely positive, and I think enough of us need to cross the divide and work with the private sector to unlock the potential. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Who else wants to respond to this question? Prabhu.
Thanks, Barbara. I want to pick up on something that Lawrence said about procurement policies, food procurement policies, and using subsidized food as the primary safety net for the poor. I think that's been a traditional strategy, and it's then resulted in this predominant focus on staple grains and staple grain productivity. Looking ahead, I think we need to think about transitioning from a food-based safety net program to a universal basic income program. If you have a basic income program for the poor, then you give the poor the choice of what to buy in terms of food. And maybe that would then create a better market for diversity and more nutritious food coming into the supply chain. And of course, such a program would also need to have investments in market infrastructure, especially rural market infrastructure, behavior change, communication, etc. But I think that's the future we need to move towards if we want to break this cycle of predominant focus on one set of commodities relative to a more balanced food system. Thank you.
Thank you. A huge paradigm shift, clearly. Great prospect, though. Mario, and then Shawn.
Yeah, Barbara, what I would like to say is that there's probably a role for new levels of regulation as well, especially because of there's a power asymmetry here that really needs to be solved, and especially some of the large companies are pushing and are lobbying for maintain status quo. And really, unless we really deal with that one effectively, it's going to be really difficult to make inroads in providing safe and nutritious food. The private industry loves incentives, but the problem with incentives is that if you don't like them, you're off the hook. So you really need a regulation side of things to really kick in for at least some standards to be met. And let's see what has happened in terms of behavioral change now with COVID and governments being able to enforce some of these things. Look at, for example, the lockdowns. The lockdowns would have been unimaginable in any other situation, but they managed to implement them. Now, imagine if we could have a regulation that, from 2021, there can not be foods with more than 15% of sugar. It's exactly the same that we've done with COVID and the lockdowns, but we need to really think how to effectively communicate the benefits and the potential impacts of better regulation. I think it's essential.
Shawn?
Thanks, Barbara. I was going to build on 2 points that other speakers have said, and I would summarize as assess and fortify. I think that so many countries, and Jess, you brought this out, of we need evidence to drive the policies, to inform the policies. So many countries just do not have a good handle on what people are consuming, and people, particularly people who have the highest nutrient needs, infants and young kids and pregnant and lactating women. So we really need to invest much more systematically in assessing diets, because to me, this becomes the lingua franca that brings together the ag side, the public health side, the social protection side. If we don't know what people are eating, we can't design a food system that is helping inform that. And then, because you also framed it of right now and where we can generate a spark, I find it is the micronutrient agenda, to me, is the most tractable part of the nutrition problem. And we should just really double down on fortification and biofortification to quickly solve the micronutrient crisis. That's not the entire thing the food system needs to deliver on, but that is one thing. We have a quick win. That's a big problem we should be able to resolve quickly. And that creates this positive energy that really can say the food system can act differently and solve a critical public health problem.
Thank you so much. I know that there's so much more that we could say on all of this, but we want to shift a little bit of our focus to some more specific examples on the ground. What is working? What are some of the case examples where you see some of the challenges that you're referring to getting addressed? You know, champions, nutritional champions on the ground, where evidence is really coming in and influencing that policy, the regulatory systems that maybe are installed, or major, I mean, we see a lot of biofortification, major fortification projects. Those are just some of what you've been capturing. But let's go to a few of our speakers and just hear a little bit more about your own local experience. Can we start with you, Salma?
Thanks, Barbara. Local, if I consider about our country in Bangladesh, you can see that our country is progressing and reducing poverty. One is road to becoming developing country. About 50 million people in Bangladesh have escaped from the extreme poverty line, and since 1991. So now this rate is 40% to from 40% to 14% today. So it's a huge improvement. And there is a steady growth in GDP, which is average 8.1 in 2019. So in Bangladesh, in some recent years, human access index has been increased. And that is, it's reduced the infant mortality, or reduce the maternal mortality, and parallelly our life expectancy has increased. And you know, our Bangladesh life expectancy is 72 years now, and literacy rate is increased because adult schooling and adult literacy increased, and per capita food consumption have been increased. So our food security significantly improved. And you know that Bangladesh is the 4th largest rice producer in the world and 5th largest fish producer in the country, in the world. And the important indicator, our agriculture is really productive, and it contributing in our GDP 14.75%. And there is another factor. Bangladesh has a strong textile and fabric industry that drives 80% of our country's export economy, and it's the 2nd largest of our world. And another thing is Bangladesh is stand among top 10 remittance receiving nation. So this is the transforming, I think it's transforming from low middle income to middle income. But Bangladesh is also is an inspiration, and also have challenges. Because still Bangladesh have 24 people living under the poverty line, and Bangladesh needs create more job and better jobs to access the food, because if we don't have a good a good credit, then we can't access the food. What Shawn indicate, we need to accessibility. So we need some good job, rising youth, which mitigate the unemployment. And there is also some Rohingya refugees crisis, and overpopulation, rapid urbanization, and climate change. And this recent some month back, there is huge flood in our country. So flood and there is some natural disaster, and some people are dying because they have no food. They have no available food in this flood affected area. And some religious fundamentalism is also here in Bangladesh. But in our country, we are also focusing, the growth is dependent on the focusing of this because our government and our some national, international organization focus on the women empowerment. So it also, if women become empowered, so it will also help to access the food. We can afford our food. So that is major things we can empower our female and educate our female, and this will help to improve the children health and also improve the education of children, and it also help to mitigate the malnutrition. Because you will know that Bangladesh has 161 billion population, and female are almost 49.42%. So if half of the population of the country doesn't join the workforce or doesn't join the economy, so that economy will never improve.
Well, thank you, Salma. Thank you so much you're painting such an amazing picture of all the forces and the pieces going on in Bangladesh. It's there's so much to do in women empowerment, improving the access, but the picture also of the strength and production of rice and the movement in livestock. So thank you. We'll come back and want to hear more and more about some of the examples of what you're doing in the Model Livestock Institute. Prabhu. Talk to us a little bit about some of the cases and examples that you know of.
Thank you, Barbara. I'd like to talk about the CGIAR, and as the CGIAR transitions towards a one CGIAR. That's very much in the discussion these days.
Yes.
I don't have to tell the World Food Prize audience about the enormous impacts that the CGIAR has had on addressing the problems of hunger and rural poverty. There have been many stalwarts of the CG that have been recognized through World Food Prize laureates, etc. One of them sitting here on the panel. Two of them actually sitting here on the panel, not just one. Much of the CG's success has been on staple food and staple grain productivity growth as a way of addressing hunger. And that's certainly been the right way to do it when hunger was predominantly a calorie deficiency issue. But now we're going beyond that. And as we go beyond that, we're recognizing that there have been significant gaps in the impacts of the CG. There have been gaps in terms of the lagging regions, particularly looking at sub-Saharan Africa, but also a significant gap in productivity improvement for crops that are important to the poor, millets and sorghum and roots and tubers and smallholder livestock systems, etc. And that gap continues to be very strong. And as we think about a balanced diet and a diversified food systems, the CGIAR needs to step up and try to address this gap. And that's going to be a major challenge for the way the CG is structured, which is very much in a commodity-oriented manner. But I think this is a great opportunity for a reset. It's a great opportunity because the demand for diversity is rising, especially among the middle class, and that creates a new opportunity for growth and new opportunity for smallholder enhancement. Nutrition is now at the center of the food policy agenda, and then there are new tools and new breeding approaches that can allow us to look at improving productivity of these so-called neglected crops, etc. So I think the one CGIAR can come in at a really good time into these opportunities. Now, I'd like to say that expanding the overall focus on the neglected commodities doesn't mean that it's a zero-sum game and that the staple foods lose out. If the promise of the 2 billion CGIAR, one CGIAR holds true, then you're actually looking at a much bigger pie, and you're able to look at a much broader broader portfolio to address, and look at the CG becoming the central force for creating that balanced food system. And I think it all hinges on how much the donors step up to expanding the funding base for this new system. If the donors don't step up, then we have some very significant choices to be made, some very significant trade-offs to be addressed relative to staple versus non-staple foods. Let me stop there, Bob.
Well, thank you, Prabhu. And we have representatives of the CGU in our dialogues this week, and putting nutrition at the center of of their investment is a tremendous challenge to put forward, and challenging the CG to provide that balance and the donors to provide that balance. I'm sure many of you have comments on that prospect, and we should talk about investment and finance before we leave today. But Renata, you work at the nexus of nutrition and health. Would you like to offer some comments here?
Yes,
taking this more into also the health from the nutrition.
Thank you, Barbara. This food health nexus, obviously, and the role of the data, this is what I would like to talk about now, and how the work that we do at the Global Nutrition Report is promoting and supporting data-driven actions and accountability. I think everybody knows by now that good nutrition is the foundation for a healthy life. So understanding this food health nexus involves developing a holistic picture of how different food system processes lead to food insecurity, contaminated or unsafe food, unhealthy diets, and ultimately poor health. Effectively understanding the channels through which our food systems affect our nutrition and our health. And when we actually place the health impacts alongside the social and environmental impacts and the staggering costs they generate, then the case for action is overwhelming. As part of the 2020 Global Nutrition Report, we have actually broken down the elements of the food system from production to consumption in 4 interdependent pillars to help understand or unravel the food health nexus: food supply chains, food environments, individual level factors that influence consumer decisions, and everybody pretty much on the panel has emphasized how important that is. And finally, consumer response. For instance, we know that food price, meaning affordability, is a major determinant of consumer behavior. We also know that healthy, nutritious food is often very expensive. For example, throughout sub-Saharan Africa, eggs, as was mentioned, fresh milk, and fortified infant cereals are prohibitively expensive for the poor. This high cost of healthy foods, coupled with the overwhelming availability of cheap, highly marketed, and unhealthy foods, is a major driver of malnutrition. And actually, the prevailing food prices do not really reflect the true societal costs of foods. Fixing our food system should involve directly addressing this. And how about the role of data? Data is a new gold, but like gold, it must be carefully processed to extract meaningful and valid conclusions. Any action to transform the food system must be equitable, by which we mean fair, just, and inclusive, and also informed by high quality granular data. So I echo that it should be disaggregated to the extent possible, and high quality evidence. Any approach should be data-driven. And we actually need an integrated food system-wide interdisciplinary approach to be able to work across all elements of our food system, given the multiple interconnected impacts of our food on our nutrition, our health, our economies, our environment. I would also like to echo the need for more research and better data to understand and improve land use and resource management, crop production and harvesting, distribution, marketing, and sale of food, nutrition, but more and better data to also understand the barriers in implementation, such as ethical, legal, and political feasibility issues. What is needed to initiate that spark or to sustain the spark. Independent analysis of the best data on nutrition is key for that evidence-based, timely, and effective actions to ensure that we're also able to deliver on our global commitment as a nutrition community to end malnutrition in all its forms. That's why, as part of the GNR work, we will be launching refreshed country nutrition profiles and nutrition for growth commitment tracking this December. And such data help us identify cost-effective policies to transform our food systems. Examples of best buys, meaning cost-effective policy solutions, are optimization of farm subsidies, increased public investment for producing healthier food products, cash transfers to increase the affordability of food, use of fiscal instruments and food reformulation to support healthier diets, but also hold the food industry accountable, limiting advertising of unhealthy processed food, and so much more, giving the choice back to consumers. Data is also critical if we wish to hold to account those that have the power to fix our food systems. That's why also, as part of the work we do at the Global Nutrition Report, we will aim to lead and coordinate a much needed global nutrition accountability framework. And this framework will play a vital role in strengthening the accountability of those who have the power to end malnutrition, including the private sector, the businesses, effectively governments, and the civil society, through driving better data, stronger commitments, and ensuring that action is being taken that matches the scale of the problem. So please stay tuned as we're working towards these different aspects of our work. Thank you.
Thank you, Renata. So just to take a couple of minutes for perhaps one or two other responses. There's so much that's been put forward here. Madhura?
Let me give a positive story from India, which may not be known outside. And this is from the state of Kerala in South India, a state with about 36 million people and led by a government that the coalition is led by communist parties, two communist parties. When the pandemic hit and the lockdown came, the chief minister announced that no one shall go hungry. And I think this was achieved with a combination of measures. The existing food distribution system we had was expanded, not just in quantity, but in coverage. In the last few months, over 1 million tons of staples were distributed just in this one state. But more than that, to take up what the point Prabhu raised, a special 17-kit grocery item with lentils and oils and spices was distributed to almost 95% of the population. As you know, schools have been closed for 6 months or more, and school meals, the staples plus the other grocery items which go into cooked food, 9 items, have been distributed to all eligible school-going children for the last 6 months. And what we call the Anganwadi centers for the preschoolers, they have been closed and the supplementary nutrition from there has also been distributed. And finally, cooked food, mobile kitchens were set up for migrant workers who didn't have access to any of these. So taken together, actually, it's right, really quite an unbelievable success in terms of ensuring no one went hungry during the pandemic. And I think something we can replicate going forward. Thank you.
Tremendous example. And yes, how do you take that kind of comprehensive response and apply it to the broad needs of food systems going forward, and especially at so many levels? Lawrence, did you have something quick before we move on?
Very quick. I wanted to share a very quick example from Bangladesh as well. GAIN was working with a youth organization called SKNF, and they work in schools and throughout the country. And they said to us, they reached out to us and they said, we're really worried. All our adolescents, all the kids in school are buying junk food. They have hardly any pocket money, but they're spending it on junk food outside the school. What can we do together? So we said, first of all, we asked the adolescents themselves, what do you think we can do? They said, we want to buy nutritious food, but it's not affordable. So we developed a pledge, a nutritious foods pledge, pocket money pledge. And we got 1 million adolescents in Bangladesh to sign this pledge. And this has woken up the government to this potential demand, this desire out there for nutritious food. And perhaps even more importantly, it's woken businesses up to this latent demand that's out there. And businesses pay a lot of attention to adolescents because they are consumers for life, potentially. So I thought that was a really exciting and potentially game-changing, unusual program.
Great. Thank you, Lawrence. And as we continue, bring in these examples. People really, I think, want to hear and understand what is working, as you both have done now. Let's shift our focus just a bit to talk about the trade-offs that you've already outlined, really, in terms of providing safe, nutritious, affordable food. How do you balance those trade-offs, especially when you're trying to support the most vulnerable groups and smallholders? And I'm going to start with Pedro. We can talk about investment and the financing of that, but other ways to navigate these trade-offs. Pedro?
Thank you, Barbara. What we're talking about here is the extreme trade-offs in extreme. And I'm talking about, again, where the food is going to be produced by farmers, by fishers, by livestock people, and so on. So I made this study very quickly. Jessica Fanso did help me, and it's gross. But on one side, you put as the nutrient-rich foods, the grain, legumes, fruits, vegetables, tree nuts, largely ignore, unsaturated oil, and from the animal side, the milk and all its derivatives, eggs, red meat, beef, lamb, and pork, poultry meat, and seafood and aquaculture. In order to produce food for 10 billion people by the year 2050, according to the Eat Lancet diet, what the world needs is to add an additional 450 million hectares of planting nutrient-rich foods. And this doesn't involve the things like milk or seafood. So 450 million hectares of more nutrient-rich foods, and interestingly enough, 630 million less hectares of nutrient-poor foods. And this is amazing, because if you subtract these two, you still have about 180 million hectares of land available for other stuff, crops produced for other purposes. And this is pretty much equivalent to the current cropland area of the United States. So we're talking about a lot of available room there. Also, interestingly, no new land clearing is needed. So we're not going to mess around with the natural systems. And there's a lot of room for other purposes. So who are the winners and who are the losers looking at this, again, globally? The winners are grain, legumes, tree nuts, which are very much underproduced, both in the tropics and the temperate regions, and unsaturated oils. The losers are sugarcane, big time, and oil palm and other saturated fats, and cereals. Many of them are used for animal foods, and many of them have now higher nutrient content, but in general, I'm talking about in general. So those are the winners and the losers. It's going to be a total paradigm shift. And what I would like to do, if somebody wants to help me, is to begin to disaggregate this data into more specific. How about India? How about Kerala, Madura? Looking at this sort of things and needs. Overall, however, I see two big problems. Iodine is a micronutrient that is ignored. And the other program, my final point, is that red meat is essential for babies who have a very small stomach, and that's about the only food that can produce enough iron for them to go ahead. Those are two specifics. Thank you, Barbara.
Thank you, Pedro. I wanted to mention about this question that we just posed that Farming First is our media partner, and they assisted in developing this question by polling the audience in advance. So again, thank you to them, and let's keep talking about these trade-offs because there was so much audience interest in it. Jess, we haven't heard from you in a while.
So Pedro, Mario, and I were just texting back and forth, and we said we would help you on the next iteration. So I was asked to talk
Pedro's report.
I was asked to talk about the disadvantaged populations that we are all talking about.
Yes.
Putting people at the center of food systems, and can we live with some of the choices that governments are making? I think we all know, and COVID has really shown this, that disadvantaged populations are more likely than the rest of the population to be at risk for experiencing morbidity, mortality that public health systems are designed to prevent. And that's often because of the social and structural determinants of poor diet, such as low socioeconomic position or lack of social capital. So we need more focused and targeted efforts towards those who are disadvantaged, those are marginalized because of the color of their skin, because of their tribe, because of their race, because of their caste, because of where they live. And we need to be thinking about how policy can focus on marginalized populations. I think it's our duty to do so. I'm just going to say 5 things to that, Barbara. First, we need to count them. They're often excluded in censuses and other surveys. They need to be counted. We need to go to where they are. You talk to people who work in the field, they don't want to go to the poorest places. They don't want to go to the most impoverished areas. They want to live in capitals. We need to involve them in problem solving, give them voice, agency, and leadership. 4, we need to see things from their worldview. We are all sitting here probably in pretty comfortable houses. We have a certain way of life. Do we really understand others' worldviews, particularly those who've been systemically marginalized? And we need to promote and deliver services in an inclusive, non-stigmatizing, and non-threatening way. And Barbara, on the can we live with the choices that governments make? No. And that's what all these social movements are about. In the US, we have the Black Lives Matter movement, and that's challenging governments on the decisions they make when they weigh trade-offs. So I think we've been a bit laissez-faire. Government's been sort of off the hook when it comes time to food systems. We need them to step up. We need them to take ownership. We need them to shepherd their food systems in the directions that benefit first and foremost their citizens. They need to hold account those who are not behaving well in the food system. So to me, we need governments to work better for the food system. And last, we need some governments to embrace multilateral cooperation and inclusion if we want to address these challenges of, quote, we are all in this together, like climate change, like COVID. You can't have governments that are becoming isolationists. We need more multilateral cooperation. I'm talking about my country, of course, the United States. But anyway, I think there's many governments that are going inward and not outward, and this is the worst time to be doing that.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that. Mario, Madura, I know you both have comments on this. I want to come to you. And Didi, we're running out of time, so short takes, if you will. Mario, you're next.
Of course. So my task is to talk about how do countries navigate the trade-offs relating to sustainability in relation to nutrition. And countries have been doing a lot in this space. Originally, from the perspective of climate change, but now really they're looking at way more integrated strategies. What's one of the initial strategies? Well, it's been agricultural intensification. Agricultural intensification has led to the world. Let me give you an example with livestock. We use 60% less land to produce a kilo of milk than what we used in 1961. An example from the OECD, the US produces 5 times more milk now with 80% less cows than in the 50s. That's an enormous land saving that then you can reallocate to produce a range of other things. This has been proven very, very a great strategy also for dairy in East Africa, for example. We've seen enormous gains in the Kenyan highlands where the production of milk has increased in the same land, and the global burden of disease has used some of the data that we have on this topic, and they found that these are significant covariates for the reductions in stunting and other indicators of child malnutrition. So intensification, definitely there. There is a whole movement around improving waste management as well. And a lot of it is now related to the circular economy or the bioeconomy. This has proven incredibly important. Well, the bioeconomy per se has been a feature of many smallholder systems in the use of resources between the different components, but a more business-like measure has been how to actually process food waste, then to repurpose it, either as feed for animals or as fertilizer, as energy, or as others. This is a very, very important thing happening now. And thirdly, well, the other key thing has been demand management. Demand management, we see it in, not for everything, but for beef. You see OECD countries, for example, now the rates of consumption per capita of beef especially have stabilized since the early 2000s, for example, and in some countries are decreasing. Obviously, this is not for everything. It's that the success has not been so amazing for all the products, but there is an indication that for some products this can happen.
Thank you, Mario. And I'm going to pick up on your second point, especially with regard to waste management, because I know, Madura, you want to talk a little bit about food waste.
I'm going to take both Mario's points, actually, his last 2 points.
Okay.
The HLPE report a few years ago, it was in 2014, when it talked about food waste, a very surprising finding to me was that the proportion of food waste, about 1/3 of production, was the same in the countries of the North and the South, exactly the same percentage, but it was at different stages of production. So the waste is at the production end, and it is the producers, the cultivators, the farmers who lose out, particularly for perishables. So I think this is a point that if we improve, we need huge investments, public and private, in food processing, storage, transport, marketing. We can actually reduce the waste, and we can make more nutritious food available, and we can raise the incomes of those producing. So I think that's an angle that we mustn't forget. I think it's a low-hanging fruit. The second point he made about demand, I think affordability is very important. It was mentioned earlier, right at the beginning. The FAO's State of Food Insecurity 2020, which has just come out, has calculated the cost of a healthy diet. And what they mean by a healthy diet is you meet the calorie norm and all the micro and macronutrients, but by consuming items from different food groups, not just staples or not just one item. And they work out that the cost is roughly $4 a day per person a day, which is in purchasing power parity dollars, whereas the most commonly used international poverty line is $1.9 a day. So not just the poor, so the poor cannot afford a healthy diet, nor can about twice that number. In fact, the number, interestingly, in South Asia, it's 58% of what they call Southern Asia are people or households who cannot afford a healthy diet. And so I think briefly that we have to ensure economic access to nutritious food. And to take the example of Kerala and other examples that people have talked about, we need transfers of different kinds. We need cash transfers, immediate cash transfers during the pandemic. This is an important short-term measure. We also need kind transfers. So I think Prabhu was saying maybe in the long term, we can talk about only income transfers. But I think right now, we need cash transfers, a variety of kind transfers, and these need not just be cereals. It can be different innovative ways of giving diverse foods. Eggs were talked about right in the beginning by Shawn.
Yes.
This could be added to school meals and so on. I'll end with that, Barbara.
Thank you. It's a thread throughout, shifting that focus. Pedro, I want to call on you, but honestly, Ndidi, maybe a quick remark from you. We're going to have to move to our lightning round because you all wanted to close with the last word. So you're going to have 10 words. That's it. 10 words as a closing comment. Lawrence, I'll start with you, but Ndidi, a final thought.
I just wanted to comment on the financing aspects and really say that it's imperative that we think about financing nutrition almost as a basket of options, starting with venture capital on one end, accelerators and incubators, and I know GAIN has been doing a lot of work on this, all the way to private equity and then catalytic financing provided by governments. And I think the impetus on the nutrition community is to make the case for why this is so critical and why there are returns. Because if consumers are willing to pay for nutritious food and companies can see the benefits, financiers will also see the benefits. And through my work with ACE Foods as an SME, we have seen the benefits of patience and catalytic financing in helping companies produce nutritious food. But we have to start changing our language to talk about this from a business and economic perspective and demonstrate the returns, not only the social returns, but the economic returns for the investors and for the companies. There is funding available, and we're seeing it being unlocked in exciting ways. So I look forward to working with some of you to do more in this area. And Lawrence has been doing a phenomenal job through GAIN on this as well.
Ndidi, thank you for saying that. It's one of the most important topics to mobilizing all of this. And yesterday, we had a really dynamic discussion on investment and finance. I invite all of you who may not have been able to be with us yesterday, get on Whova and you can view the entire session. So we're going to close with this lightning round. We've got to close in a few short minutes because we have 2 exciting workshops to go to, one of which Lawrence is involved in. So Lawrence, 10 words or less, what are your final challenges on these competing needs in the food system?
Pedro has given us a glimpse of the future, a glimpse of an alternative reality. But to make sure that we wake up and that's not just a dream, we have to rouse governments, civil society and businesses from their slumber. Otherwise, we are walking into a disaster.
Excellent. Thank you. Who'd like to go next? Pedro?
Yeah. The reason why these nutritious, healthy diets are not affordable now is a lack of supply. If we change the acreage of the nutrient-rich foods, the legumes, the fruit, the vegetables, the tree nuts, and so on, then the price will go down. Eventually, that's it.
There it is. Thank you. Who's next? Prabhu and then Polly.
We need policy convergence across agriculture, food, nutrition, and health to successfully get to positive nutrition outcomes.
Thank you. Terrific. Polly and then Mario.
We need to seek solutions that incentivize innovative technology adoption, soil, water, and human capacity, as well as understanding thoroughly cultural food preferences.
Ah, yes. Cultural food preferences, one we haven't thought of, haven't mentioned at least. And we are madly taking notes on all of these final comments. So Mario and then Shawn.
Yes, we need to embrace all the innovation that is really available and that is coming in the space of food systems. there's many game changes that will actually help reduce this crisis.
Shawn, and then Jess.
Supporting governments to really have evidence-based policy discussions to navigate these complex trade-offs they're facing, to move this global discussion into really practical applications in country where it matters, and really seize this incredible surge of innovations that are occurring in real time because of people on the ground actually finding solutions during this pandemic. And then embrace that we have a soil scientist speaking eloquently about the nutrient needs of infants and young kids. This is what we need to do, is really broaden the voices who speak to nutrition.
Thank you. Jess, and then Renata.
And this really goes to our American colleagues, vote with your fork.
There you go. Renata, and then Madhura. We'll close.
We need to work together, invest in nutrition, and strengthen accountability to build population resilience and protect the gains we've made.
Thank you. Thank you. Madhura, and then Salma, I'll call on you next. Madhura?
It's been said before, but I think we have to get our governments to commit. And going forward, at least for the next 1 year of the pandemic, demand is very important. We have to give transfers, cash and kind transfers to the poor.
Thank you. Salma, your final thought.
We need government intervention and also food donation. And there is another thing, we should make urban or peri-urban farming. We should give emphasis on peri-urban farming. That's we also need social changes because social change definitely ensure the food accessibility.
Thank you. Thank you. Ndidi, you have the last word.
We must cross our divides, our silos, our borders, and work collaboratively, sharing best practices and lessons, because we need each other more now than ever before to ensure that we change the narrative and create the world that we so deserve.
Thank you so much. And isn't that the beauty of moving towards food systems and talking in this holistic fashion? Because we will break down those borders. The collaboration is happening. The silos are coming down. So thank you so much to our wonderful panelists and the fabulous discussion. There's so much going on chat in so many areas. So we're going to be capturing all of that and returning it to you. We see that we have a global mandate to provide safe, affordable, nutritious, sustainable, and equitable food year-round. And what we're hearing in discussion after discussion is we have to do it all. It's a very complex task. It involves so many stakeholders, all levels of stakeholders. But you hear this convergence that in this year, in 2020, diverse perspectives all agree. We must move forward. This is partly what we're calling Norman Borlaug's evolution of the Green Revolution. And I just want to close today's session with a short comment. So 50 years ago, Norman Borlaug received his Nobel Prize, and he said to the Nobel Prize Committee, "Food is the moral right of all born into this world." This is a moniker that we at the World Food Prize Foundation live with. Resilient food systems must deliver the nutritious and equitable food for all. It is a required worldwide mandate and the subject also of our next round of discussions, equitable access for food, to food for all. So now I want you to prepare for our 2 interactive workshops coming up. One is focused on GAIN and Johns Hopkins University's Food Systems Dashboard. And they'll be demonstrating the application of this dashboard and announcing a few winners who have come up with some pretty exciting and unique applications. The second workshop going on at the same time is Tanager's Ignite Gender Diagnostic Tool, which is mainstreaming gender-sensitive decision-making into the food system, and small groups will be working on this diagnostic tool and the scoring mechanisms they use. So jump right into those 2 workshops. post on your social media, hashtag Food Prize 20 and at World Food Prize. And thank you so much for joining us for this session. You can watch for Farming First Daily Digest at the end of the day today. They're our media partners and doing a terrific job. The Daily Digest came out on Monday, and I don't know if you saw it, but it included an interview with Ambassador Earthren Cousin. And Earthren is going to be, she offered her insights on Monday, but she's going to be interviewing the president of IFAD later today. So thank you all for joining us, and we are looking forward to the continuation of all of our discussions. Thanks to the panelists.